Moksibucija je jedan od najstarijih načina tradicionalnog liječenja u istočnoj Aziji. U Kini, Japanu, Koreji, Mongoliji, Nepalu, Tibetu, Vijetnamu smatra se da je riječ o tradiciji staroj tisućama godina. Dio je rane povijesti istočnoazijske medicine, koja još uvijek krije mnoge principe koje tek treba ponovno otkriti i pogledati novim očima. Moksibuciju se najbolje može opisati kao starijeg rođaka akupunkture. U biti riječ je o spaljivanju ili tinjanju biljaka iznad kože, što se može raditi na više načina, pomoću akupunkturnih igala ili pak direktno na kožu. Nije bila nepoznata niti u Europi, dok je stigla kroz diplomate i druge Europljane koji su u 17. stoljeću upoznavali Daleki istok. Moksibuciju se često povezuje s biljkom pelin, koja je i na zapadu poznata po svojim ljekovitim svojstvima, a dio i domaće tradicije korištenja ljekovitih biljaka. Kad se na jednom mjestu sreću istok i zapad, budućnost i prošlost, znači da smo opet ovdje, na rubu znanosti. Dobar večer. Merlin Young stiže iz Velike Britanije, autor je knjige Mjesec iznad Mutsušime, koja se do potankosti bavi ponovnim istraživanjem drevne tehnike, koja se naziva Moksibucija. Ima i neke druge nazive. Nakon 40-50 minuta mislim da će svima biti jasno o čemu se radi. Dobar večer.
Good evening.
Za početak da raščistimo taj misterij odmah na početku. Što to jest Moksibucija, odnosno što to jest moksa, u kojoj mjeri su ta dva izraza nekako se odnose na istu stvar, u kojoj mjeri znači različito?
Okay, so moksibustion is the actual process of doing the therapy itself. Moksa is the material that we use. Moksa is it's refined from the mugwort plant to become, I'll show a little bit here maybe. So it becomes like a fluffy substance, and it burns very easily, burns extremely easily actually, and it can be used on either on the skin or off the skin for therapeutic purposes. It's very ancient.
Kako ste se vi sreli sa moksibucijom, koja na Dalekom istoku nije uopće nova stvar, nije niti nepoznata, možda je kod nas bila nekad poznata, no ipak kako je došlo do toga da ste napisali knjigu i kao što ćemo tijekom emisije vidjeti danas po svijetu od Afrike do Europe i drugdje se upravo bavite promicanjem te tehnike koja se pokazala dosta uspješna za razne bolesti suvremenog doba.
So moksa is part of the canon, I guess, of acupuncture. In Chinese, the word for acupuncture, they call it zhenzhou, or in Japan, shinkyu, and these are two separate characters. So in Chinese, zhen is a metal needle, and zhou is like a fire under something that is kind of old or twisted. And actually, it's the proper translation for zhenzhou would be acupuncture and moksibustion, or acupuncture and moksa, or we could make it short, acumoksa. But when they originally, acupuncture came to the West, it was originally discovered by some of the travelers in say, the 1600s. They only really focused on the needles for acupuncture. So I studied acupuncture in the UK. I learned acupuncture, and we learned a little bit about moksa, but not very much because it's not very well understood. But I became more interested in acupuncture, in moksa in the course of time, when I realized actually it's a very powerful treatment on its own.
Kaže se da je moksa zapravo starija sestra ili stariji brat od akupunkture. To bi značilo da se na neki način može uputiti čovjeku u prošlost daleko istočnih kultura, prije svega u ovom slučaju Kine, Indije, to je to područje od kuda onda su stvari se širile i prema Japanu i drugdje, i ustanoviti zapravo što je starije uopće, akupunktura, moksa, kada se uopće spominje ta metoda u bilo gdje na Dalekom istoku u povijesti, ali mislim da su zapravo kineski izvori oni najstariji.
Moksa is very clearly older than acupuncture. In actual fact, the archaeological evidence suggests that actually it was the precursor for the theories of acupuncture. And with acupuncture, you have these theories of these meridians or channels on the body which connect the acupuncture points. The oldest acupuncture texts are about 2,000 years old, somewhere between 100 BC, 100 AD. There are some Moxa texts which were lost, which never survived, but they were found in China in 1973 in a tomb, a prince's tomb, and there were two particular texts only talking about Moxa, no needles, and they described the meridians almost in identical ways that were later described in the acupuncture books. So what it looks like is that Moxa is an older treatment. The technology for acupuncture came along. Technology for making needles was at the time that acupuncture was developed, needles would have been very expensive, very difficult to make. Moxa, everything about Moxa is very simple, in contrast. So I think what happened is that the early acupuncturists learned the theories of the meridians, these channels, and the ways of treating it from the Moxa traditions, and then they took it to a different level, and they made it very sophisticated in the process. So from that moment on, acupuncture became kind of like the high-tech medicine of its time. Moxa then was very plain, but Moxa survived because Moxa actually has these capacity to treat some things which acupuncture can't treat at all.
Je li Moxa danas, kao i nekad na Dalekom istoku, bila metoda kojom su se koristili liječnici, stručnjaci nekakvi obrazovani u tom smislu, ili je to bila jedna od metoda kojima su se ljudi mogli na neki način i sami pomoći upravo zbog njene, rekao bih, jednostavnosti i neinvazivnosti?
I think probably the acupuncturists were very educated people, and they were probably treating wealthier people in society. The Moxa specialists may well have been illiterate. Some of the ways that plainly were used in history for locating some of the points were using pieces of string, measurements taken off the patient's mouth or the length of the arm, rather than sophisticated anatomical locations. So it looks very much like Moxa was like a lay practice, a village practice. Acupuncture would have been a sophisticated city practice. Moxa would have been something that maybe the grandma used, maybe something that you might have maybe the local shaman would have been using. In recent years in Japan has got a very interesting tradition of Moxa, and in recent years in Japan it was very much used as a family village therapy, right into the current era. In both Japan and in China and in Korea, I think that still this tension between these two treatments still exists, and the focus is always on acupuncture.
No, kada je Moxa postala sinonim za sam pelin? Jer evo u ovom njenom tanjuriću, kao što ćete malo poslije pokazati, je lišće pelina, pa se onda od njega radi prah. Moxa je izvorno značila zapravo metodu tinjanja neke biljke ili praha od biljke, koje mogu biti bilo kojeg podrijetla. Zašto se baš nekako pelin pojavio kao sinonim za Moxu s vremenom?
We know when the word Moxa came into the Western languages. It was in the 17th century. The Dutch East India Company were trading in East Asia, and they were trading from a trading center in Jakarta. What is now Jakarta was known then as Batavia, trading all the way around into China, into Japan, and around Indonesia. And there was a reverend. His name was Buschhoff. He was a Dutchman, and he had very bad gout. They were very heavy drinkers, the Dutch. In the East India Company, very, very heavy drinkers. They would be drinking spirit for breakfast. And so they had a lot of gout. He had gout, and his wife knew this. She was actually a Vietnamese female physician, and she had treated one of their slaves for some sort of psychiatric disorder using this Moxa. Moxa is actually a Japanese word. It means burning herb. Mogusa. Mogusa means burning herb. And so the way I see it is probably this Vietnamese doctor would have said to Buschhoff's wife, I could treat your husband, you know. And so she goes to him and she says, she says she can treat you. How is she going to treat me? Oh, she's going to burn something. What? So he wouldn't have probably liked the idea. Anyway, she did, and it's documented. He wrote about it, and he burnt this mogusa onto his foot on the gout. Miraculously, the pain disappeared. So now he's a Dutchman, and he's got a business idea in his head. He thinks, if I can get this stuff back to Europe, there's lots of gout in Europe. So he sent the mogusa back to Europe to his son and to his brother in Utrecht. And he sent a piece of literature, he'd written up about it. They printed it in Utrecht, and they printed it in Dutch, and they printed it in English. And it was used, but they never told anybody what the plant was, because they didn't want to break their own monopoly. Unfortunately, he died about 3 years later, and so everything just fell apart. But that was how the word moksa came into the Western language.
No kada je baš pelin postao ekskluzivna biljka koju se koristi za moksu, s obzirom da se u vašoj knjizi može pročitati da su se nekad davno različite biljke koristile na isti način, da tinjanjem zapravo na neki način pomažu kroz akupunkturne kanale?
I don't know, is the honest answer, because it's not anywhere in the written history. My guess is how this originated is that this mugwort plant, which grows right the way across the northern hemisphere, right the way from Europe, right the way across from Europe, right into East Asia, and it burns very easily. So if you like rub it together, and then you put a spark into it, then you can start to build a fire. Now, my idea is it probably originated in Central Asia. So you're talking about people who are nomadic. They're moving from summer pastures to winter pastures, spring pastures, moving with their herds of sheep or yak or whatever. And they'll be moving around, and the first thing they do whenever they move to a new camp is, first thing, light the fire. So then they would carry this stuff with them. This is a very valuable commodity because this is life. If they can get the fire going, everything is fine. So this would be a very anything that would make tinder, that can make a fire, would be very valuable, about as valuable as water, to be honest. So I think this is where it starts from. It starts from outside, and then somewhere along the line, this stuff has its own symbolism, and so then it starts to be used on the skin for warming the body. And because this stuff burns so easily and you can control the heat, then I think that they may have tried different substances, but this stuff it burns better than anything else. If I could just add to that, what we know now is that there are chemicals in this plant which have therapeutic effects on the body if they absorb through the skin. And that probably is part of the story as well. But that's only been exposed by science today.
Razmotrit ćemo malo kasnije te sastojke. Zanimljivo je uočiti da i na hrvatskom riječ pelin zapravo u sebi, ako se malo damo onako mašti, sadrži to isto značenje pelin, spaljen, speljin, spaljen. Na neki način bi se moglo povezati da su očigledno ljudi, naravno ako je netko primijetio u Aziji, zašto ne bi netko i ovdje primijetio da nešto se lako pali, i možda je upravo to lako paljenje naravno dio razloga zašto je pelin postao tako popularan. Eto, sad možete nam malo objasniti ove tu dijelove koje imate. Ovo je znači sušena biljka pelin, no koliko treba te sušene biljke da bi se dobila količina ovog materijala kojeg vi koristite, a koje je ovako malo nekako kao
Okay, we have different grades of mugwort that are used for different purposes. The particular purpose that I'm particularly interested in is actually very highly refined mugwort. So you start off with say 100 grams of dried mugwort leaf. You can make a reasonable mugwort, a moksa out of it. This is moksa that I've made myself, and this was just made with a pestle and mortar and a kitchen sieve, no more. And that's about 20%. So if I start off with 100 grams of leaf, I end up with 20 grams of reasonable mugwort. This will burn quite easily, but it wouldn't be good enough for the sort of techniques that I'm particularly interested in, techniques which strengthen the body and also promote an immune response. And for that we need more refined mugwort. And this is more, it's yellower, but this is about between 2 and 5% of the original. So I start off with 100 grams, now I'm ending up with 2 or 5 grams. Nothing is added. What we have is the mugwort leaf it has like hairs, tiny hairs on the underside. So basically, you ground with the simplest way possible. You grind with a pestle and mortar. You put and then you put the contents into a sieve, rub it on the sieve. A lot of dust drops out the bottom, and that's mainly the leaf matter. And what stays behind is these tiny hairs. So then you put it back into and you grind it again. You put it back in the sieve, and you do it several times over. It's hard work, but this is what you end up with. You end up with these tiny hairs on the bottom of the leaf, and that's what burns the most easily, and also at a lowest temperature.
Čemu služe ovi drugi alati? Vidimo tu neke kutije.
Okay, well, the most common use of for moksa, which is used throughout East Asia, is using it as a cigar. So you have a cigar here, which is packed with mugwort, with processed moksa, and it lights very easily. And then you wave it around. It burns warm, so you wave it around over the skin. It creates quite a lot of heat, and you're not doing anything directly on the skin itself. So that's probably the most commonly used. In China, they use it a lot in what they call TCM hospitals, where you're using acupuncture and moksa. This is used a lot. It has a very... This is from Japan, this one. It's a very beautiful one. Has a very fragrant smell. I don't know if you want to have a smell.
Ja mogu, ne znam kako će kroz kameru do naših gledatelja prodati miris. It's vrlo ugodan miris i intenzivan.
It's a pleasant smell, though, isn't it? So that's one way of using it. Then you could get, if you were using fairly raw moksa, you can put it you pack it into this box here, and you light it. Put this on the top so the smoke can come out, and then you can put it on areas of the body to create like areas of warmth, so you can warm the abdomen, warm the lower back. So it's very pleasant for the patient. And then you have this more refined moksa. And this is much less common, but this is, for me, is by much the most interesting. And you get very, very tiny pieces. So I'm going to lick it so it'll stick to myself. And really, it's like half a grain of rice, we call it, half a grain of rice, and then you light that and you burn it down to the skin. And this is the most interesting, for me, the most interesting form of moksa of all, because what it does is it promotes an immune response in the body, and that immune response is really quite powerful. So although it's a very, very tiny piece, you creating an immune response which particularly in people in immune-compromised situations, can be extremely powerful, extremely beneficial.
Koje su odlike te reakcije imunološkog sustava nakon paljenja ovakve male količine pelina na ruci?
Yeah. Well, there's a long... the research goes back to about the mid-1920s, and they started looking at the immunological response. And what they were saying is that you burn this moksa on the skin, it will increase the white blood cell count. So at the time that was good enough because white blood cells were just understood as being white blood cells. Now we have a much more sophisticated understanding of white blood cells. There are different types of white blood cells within the overall white blood cells, parts of which create very sophisticated immune response, part of which create very plain, simple immune response. So now we try and unpack it a little bit more. There's a tradition in Japan and not just in Japan actually, but in China as well, but there's a 20th century tradition in Japan, in the early part of the 20th century, of this stuff being used for treating tuberculosis. They had a lot of tuberculosis in Japan in the 1920s, 30s, 40s. And there were no drugs because the drugs hadn't been discovered yet. And this was used in Japan for treating tuberculosis on quite a wide scale with a lot of documentary evidence. So we've taken our own. I'm the founder of a very tiny UK charity. We call it Mox Africa. They have a lot of tuberculosis in Mox Africa. Some of it is drug resistant, and a lot of it is complicated by being co-infected with HIV/AIDS, which is very dangerous if you have the two diseases together. So we thought about this, and we thought, well, this is a really simple treatment, requires very little resource, so maybe it could be put to use to help fight this enormous pandemic of tuberculosis. If we have the opportunity, I'd like to give you some of the numbers because they're frightening. But so our first thought was, well, could it be used? Could it be put to be used? So, to cut a long story short, we ended up with, we did a couple of pilot studies, but we ended up doing a proper, full scientific randomized control trial in Uganda. And we had 180 TB patients. We split them into two groups, one with Moxa, one without, and we compared how the patients fared, and we also looked at their blood response. So that included their white blood cell count, and also included the white blood cells, which are particularly visible in terms of relation to HIV. And what we saw with very minimal treatment, because we decided to use very minimal treatment to start with, for safety's sake, and also because we wanted the patients to complete the trial. And with very minimal treatment, there's a clear difference between the two groups. So this is the first step of what we think might be some very exciting work.
Možete li nam pokazati moksu u praksi? Znači...
Okay, so if we were treating all you need is a tiny little bit rub between the fingers, and hopefully this isn't going to drop off. So then we have an ordinary cheap lighter. Nothing is fancy with Moxa, absolutely nothing is fancy. And we have a little lighting taper here. So we get that lit, and all we do is we just touch that to the Moxa. The Moxa burns down, and as it gets down to the skin, we just pop it out. Okay?
And that's it?
That's it. That's it. Now, what we've used with our TB patients is we use a point on the leg. It's a classic acupuncture point. It's a point which does a lot of things, but one of the things we're pretty sure it does is possibly stimulates the overall systemic immune response in a way that no other acupuncture point can. It also stimulates the digestive system. It also seems to energize the body a little bit. So this is like our key point. And we ask the patients to do this. They can do it on themselves, which is very interesting, because patients who are ill, their life is largely out of control. They don't know, they've lost control of their own destiny, in a sense. So they've got something they can do to put their life back together again. So they treat it. We ask them to treat once a day, morning or evening, to suit them. 7 of these tiny little cones on each leg. It takes about 5 minutes. So it's that simple.
U kojoj mjeri je pelin, možete to u vodi ugasiti, u kojoj mjeri je pelin istraživan u ovoj vašoj knjizi koja ima tako neobičan naziv, zove se Moon over Matsushima, nije objavljena kod nas, to je u stvari stih iz haiku pjesme jednog čovjeka, Japanca, koji je spomenuo Moksu u svojoj ovoj pjesmici, pa ste zato to stavili kao naslov. U kojoj mjeri je do danas baš sam pelin istraživan? Na jednom mjestu piše da on sadrži čak 192 kemikalije. Ove sekunde doista nije važno da li je 185 ili 196. No, što se zna o pelinu u smislu ljekovitosti te biljke, mada nije to nužno promatrati na onaj farmakološki način kada je reč o akupunkturnim meridijanima, s obzirom da tu vrijede druga pravila do kojih ćemo također doći. No, ipak što ga odlikuje da je toliko bio cijenjen? Je li to bilo samo zbog toga što ga se lako pali, ili je on imao neke posebne medicinske kvalitete koje su danas možda zaboravljene, pa ih ponovno se treba podsjetiti?
Yeah. I suspect that the actual immunological mechanism for this technique is actually probably quite complicated. There is definitely heat involved, no question about it. And we think that the heat input creates probably two different effects, two different separate effects. We have what they call heat shock proteins beneath the skin, which respond to heat. It's the body's own way of reacting to a burn. If the body is burnt to a certain temperature, certain heat shock proteins actually trigger a particular response, which is suitable for that amount of burn. So at different temperatures, these different heat shock proteins trigger. There is also responses within the autonomic nervous system, without trying to get too complicated, that are quite sophisticated, also respond from heat. But also within the mugwort plant itself, there are these 192 chemicals, but the two dominant ones are these two chemicals. One is called borneol and the other is cineol. And those also chemically trigger these same heat shock proteins in different ways. So the probability is that there's a very sophisticated immune response going on, and if we do that at the right place, then it's not just a localized immune response around the burn, it actually creates a systemic immune response, a very well, not subtle, but a very small immune response which you can build. You have to do this daily, and you don't expect a miracle straight away. So you do small amounts, and you're building up a cumulative effect over, it could be months, to actually promote a recovery from a chronic illness like tuberculosis.
Spominjali ste da ne treba očekivati čuda, no činjenica je da su se pelinu pripisivali neki magični atributi tijekom povijesti. Kakvi i što?
Yeah, there's mugwort smoke is used in Buddhist temples in Japan for sure. In Shinto temples in Japan, it's like a space clearing. The smoke of mugwort. There's been used. Mugwort has been used in Central Asia actually, as well as in East Asia. It's like a warding off demons of disease. So it was hung over windows, put on roofs. In Central Asia, it used to be put on roofs in midsummer. So there are some quite esoteric, traditional esoteric properties around the mugwort plant, which can possibly be explained scientifically, actually, because the mugwort plant itself, it repels insects. The word is in northern European languages we have this word mugwort, and the root of the mug bit of the mugwort is related to mosquitoes or midges. So if you hang these dried branches of this plant over the windows, it would ward off mosquitoes. In high summer, mosquitoes carry disease, including malaria. Malaria used to be in Croatia. I understand there was malaria in Croatia until 100 years ago. So if you are hanging this plant over your windows or had it on your roof, then your children might not get malaria next summer. So you would interpret this as being some form of esoteric property of the plant. Actually, it's to do with the fact that the mosquitoes don't like, there's something about the smell of the plant they don't like, so they don't come through the window. The people down the road who didn't put this over their windows, their kids got malaria this year. So you think, well, this is magic.
Ovdje na Jadranu za tjeranje komaraca tradicionalno se koristi lavanda, ali u tom istom smislu, s obzirom da komarci također očito ne vole više biljaka. Spominje se direktna i indirektna tehnika korištenja mokse. Pa koje su razlike? Neke od njih dodiruju kožu, neke ne, ponekad se čak i igle koriste. Pa objasnite nam sve te metode korištenja mokse, ili da kažemo podmetode.
Yeah, so the good thing about indirect moxa, so this would be using our cigar would be an indirect. There's no, it doesn't touch the skin. So the good thing about indirect moxa is there's no danger of a burn. There's no danger of the patient getting injured. There are other ways of using indirect moxa. We talked about the box. There's another thing that you can use if you have an acupuncture needle. You could put like if this was an acupuncture needle, you put a blob of it on the top, and you smolder it. This is still indirect. The needle may be on the skin, but you're getting lovely radiant warmth around it. It's very effective for back pain, very effective for knee problems. So there are different ways of using indirect techniques. There's another technique where you put something, you burn the moxa on like a platform of a slice of ginger or a slice of garlic for different purposes. So there's various ways of using indirect, and obviously the beauty of the indirect technique is there's no danger of a burn. The direct techniques, you definitely have a danger of a burn. And the tradition, certainly the traditions in 17th century China, they used a lot of moxibustion, and they were using big cones and they were deliberately burning it to the skin and deliberately creating big blisters. This was regarded as absolutely vital for there to be effect. There's a very famous combination of points on the back. They're called the 4 flowers. And when I first heard about the 4 flowers, I thought, what a lovely name, the 4 flowers. So I must investigate the 4 flowers. So I learned about the 4 flowers, and then I realized actually what the flowers were are big blisters. This is the flower of the blister. And it's actually, the idea was this is bringing out the disease in some way through the blister. Well, these are techniques which you couldn't possibly replicate today. You'd be driven out of town if you were to do it in Western Europe, I think. But actually what we know from the Japanese traditions, which is, Japanese love to reduce things to smaller sizes. They love to make them beautiful in terms of they're exquisite, I think would be the right word. So the Japanese developed this, they developed more highly refined moxa, and they developed smaller moxa cones, and they took it to a different level. And with these techniques, then you don't have to blister, you don't have to create a blister. And actually, it's the last thing we want to do is create blisters on people who are already ill. So, but it's still a direct technique. But the beauty of the direct technique, if you can use the right type of moxa and you don't burn, you don't create a blister, is that you can actually get the chemical onto the skin, and then this chemical will absorb through the skin to create this secondary effect on the immune system. So particularly for immune system, for immunotherapeutic type responses, one particular usage for this that I personally use in the UK with patients is patients who are undergoing chemotherapy. So, maybe I should come back to that in a minute. What we're using then is deliberately a direct response, a direct technique, which is more effective. You can't get that same technique with an indirect response. But indirect techniques are useful for other purposes, as I said, maybe for helping with back pain or just creating a nice warm feeling in cold limbs.
Znači, za lakše bolesti, reklo bi se. Za teže bolesti, malo više temperature na kožu. Tako bi se reklo. No, sad smo se usredotočili na načine tog stvaranja, tog tinjanja iznad kože. No, kao što je prije rečeno, moksa je pjesnički govoreći stariji brat ili sestra akupunkture, znači da se temelji na istim principima koji su negdje od 70-ih, možda 77. prepoznati i na zapadu kada je akupunktura dobila svoje priznanje od Svjetske zdravstvene organizacije i slično. Mada ipak nikom još nije bilo potpuno jasno ili prihvatljivo kako ona to radi. Koncept meridijana, koncept kija i čija, koliko god da je u jednom dijelu svijeta, skoro na pola svijeta, samo razumljiv, u drugoj polovici nije ni najmanje razumljiv i bilo je pokušaj da se uđe tome u trag. Pa u knjizi ste se bavili sličnostima moderne imunologije i istočno-azijskog koncepta kija ili čija, ovisno jesmo li u Kini ili Japanu, ali uglavnom se govori o nekakvoj, neki kažu životnoj sili, neki kažu energiji, možda bi najpreciznije bilo reći informaciji. Koje su to sličnosti koje su se do danas na neki način već i pokazale, jer se moksa upravo temelji na istim principima kao akupunktura, znači na principu da postoje meridijani kroz koji ide neki tok, oni mogu imati blokade ili mogu biti, da kažemo, probušeni pa da energija ide van, i na slične načine kako se radi kod akupunkture, radi se i s moksom. No, ako stavimo na trenutak moksu na stranu, do danas, evo, sad smo već debelo odmakli u 21. stoljeće. Koje su te sličnosti gdje se zapravo taj fantomski ki ili či odjednom na neki način može povezivati sa onim što imunologija u suvremenom smislu riječi i govori?
There is a concept in the acupuncture literature of two types of qi. One is called the zhang qi, which is kind of like the upright qi, and the other is called the wei qi. The wei qi is the defensive qi of the body. And the Chinese are very clear about this. There's two different types of qi. And the wei qi is, by definition, is roving the body and is unreliable. It's sort of wild, needs to be controlled very carefully. And it's very interesting, the similarities. I think it's very dangerous. It can be very dangerous to try and put two different systems together and try and draw too many conclusions out of it. But I think it is very interesting that the idea of the wei qi is very similar in lots of ways to the immune system. They say the wei qi is more on the surface, the zhang qi is deeper. Well, the outer layer of the immune system is the skin. It's the barrier between us and the outside world, which is, frankly, poisonous to us. So, but we have these white blood cells that are roving around. We call them natural killer cells. The idea of this Wei Qi being wild and reckless is very similar. The language is very similar. It's uncannily similar in a way that we have this stuff within us which is designed to find things that are foreign and whack them. And so if you have an army that is going to be effective, that army has to be able to kill things. So the fact that it can kill things means that it needs to be tightly controlled. In every army we have this discipline. We have to discipline our army. Otherwise they get drunk and they go out of control on a Saturday night or whatever. So we have this, and we have this same system within our immune system, is we have immune cells that can get out of control. Today we call this autoimmune disease. So the concepts between this idea of Wei Qi, this defensive Qi, and our own immune system are very similar, although they're not the same thing. And so one of the ideas that I try and explore in the book is the similarities between this and what it may imply for this therapy, this Moksibustian therapy. And I personally feel that Moksibustian can actually work with this, whether we want to call it the immune system or the Wei Qi, depending on which language we want to use. It can work with this in a way that actually acupuncture can't. Acupuncture can't stimulate our immune system in the same way, and acupuncture can't regulate or regularize this roving army of what we know now as white blood cells that are coursing around the body, stored in places, and then they get brought out when they're needed because some cell down here identifies that I have a foreign body in I've put a splinter in my hand, and so it sends a message, and all of a sudden there's a course of cells goes down to actually make sure that everything is okay down here, and my hand isn't going to drop off.
U kojoj mjeri, čuli smo prije kako je sa prvim istraživačima Dalekog istoka su se pojavile prve informacije, spominjali ste jednog čovjeka, u knjizi spominjete i više njih. I naravno da se ta tradicija pojavila očito s vremenom naravno i zaboravljena, pričamo o stoljećima, pričamo o desetljećima. Kada u novije vrijeme se opet pojavila informacija o njoj, naravno nije to bila potpuno detaljna informacija, ali kao što vidimo vi u Velikoj Britaniji ste se prilično posvetili upravo toj materiji i po svijetu. Također, spominjali ste Ugandu koju ćemo se opet malo vratiti na kraju, no je li bilo nekih pravih kliničkih istraživanja na raznim situacijama, baš po pitanju mokse u Europi ili možda negdje drugdje u zapadnom svijetu, ako je privukla možda pažnju istraživača?
Well, the answer to this is very, very little. Acupuncture has been researched quite widely in the West, but this was one of the first things we realized is that when we were looking for the investigation of moksha itself and for these properties of moksha, there's almost nothing in the English language. In the back of the book here, if I can find it, there's a list of papers that were actually, there's a list of 1, 2, 3, 4 pages of research studies that have been published in English or in Japanese or in Chinese, but almost none of them have been done in Europe or in the Western world, what we call the Western world. So, but we've actually, our little charity, we've actually finished one now. We've finished one in Uganda.
A dobro, prije te Ugande, ova skromna zbirka, znači samo 4 stranice, ne izgleda malo, ali kada se zna da se radi o Europi, Americi, Japanu, Kini ukupno, onda jest malo. Što te kliničke studije ukratko kažu?
The clinical studies, particularly the ones that I've tried to identify in the book, particularly, are almost all about looking at an immune response from this treatment. The problem is that depending on how you research it, you get a different set of data. So the size of your moxa cone is going to create different effects if it's a larger cone or a smaller cone. Of that we're sure. Now, if your subject animal is a human being, then you weigh, I don't know, 70 kilograms, and you use tiny pieces of moxa, which is basically the tiny piece of moxa like I showed here. That's about 1 milligram. Now, if I use that same piece of moxa, but I'm going to do research on a mouse, which a lot of those studies are looking at animal response. Now, that little thing there on a mouse is going to be about the size of that. It's a huge, huge burn. So depending on the model that's been, the subject model that is being used, whether it's a mouse, whether it's a rabbit, whether it's a guinea pig, or a human being, there's so many variables, and then one study uses 7 cones on 1 point, another study uses 3 cones on 5 points. So there's huge variations in dosage between these studies. What nearly all the studies say is there is an immune response. The problem is that the studies describe different immune responses. And the reason for that, that's pretty depressing if you're trying to identify something which is unified and you want to convince people. Well, it's confusing, it's incoherent, except that you can say, well, there does appear to be an immune response. But the reason why it's incoherent in the way it is simply because different subject models have been used and different dosages have been used. So what needs to happen is a more coherent approach where you're using very similar techniques, very similar dosages, and very similar models to build up a more coherent picture.
Naravno, problem je, rekli bismo, matematičke prirode. Koliko ima akupunkturnih meridijana, koliko točaka, pa koliko vrsta životinja, koliko mogućnosti količine, to su zapravo neizbrojive mogućnosti varijacija. No, eto, u zadnjih par godina spominjali ste prije da ste u Ugandi zapravo ponudili primjenu mokse zbog velike raširenosti tuberkuloze, velike raširenosti AIDS-a i sl. Tko je pokazao u Ugandi interes i uopće koja je raširenost tih bolesti u Ugandi, da bi se zapravo stekla bolja slika zbog čega su tamo ljudi na neki način i medicinski radnici bili skloni prigrliti nešto što je bilo efikasno i jednostavno, s obzirom da je riječ o količinama koje su možda za nas i nezamislive. Koje bi uopće bili rasponi tih bolesti u toj zemlji?
Yeah. Well, I think it's as simple as this, really. If you are on the front line of a struggle to contain an infectious disease and you are effectively losing the battle, then you're more likely to contemplate the unlikely, the unusual, the bizarre, than if you're working in a beautiful hospital in Western Europe, and that bizarre would include burning something on the skin that makes smoke. How could you have smoke in a hospital these days? So, we're not even allowed to smoke in restaurants, are we? So in a hospital? And the reality is that, thankfully, in Western Europe, we have comparative or very little tuberculosis these days. In 4 days ago, March 24th, we call it World TB Day, was the day in 1882 when a very famous German immunologist called Robert Koch first discovered or announced his discovery of the bacteria that is the tuberculosis bacteria. At that time, 1 in 7 people were dying from this disease in Western Europe. It was a horrific problem. Now that disease has been driven down in Western Europe to being almost insignificant. There is still tuberculosis, but in reality it's driven into insignificance. And the reason for that is not just there's a set of drugs or there's a vaccine which actually doesn't work very well. It's because people have much better nutrition than they used to, and they work and they live in much better conditions than we used to live in and our forefathers lived in. Now that situation does not exist in the developing world, and that's why TB is out of control in half of the world. The reality is that, and you can confirm this if you look on WHO statistics, the current estimate is that 32% of mankind is infected with tuberculosis. And it doesn't mean they've got infectious disease themselves, it means they have the disease within them that could break out at any moment. 32% is 2 billion, more than 2 billion people, about 2.3, 2.4 billion people who have got this disease within them. This is a disease that's been curable for 60 years. It's a disease that has a vaccine that admittedly is not that effective, but it is partly effective, and that's been around since the 1920s, nearly 100 years ago. It's quite beyond belief that this disease is still out there, but in countries in Africa, in South Asia, India is riddled with tuberculosis. But now, above and beyond just tuberculosis, now we have these drug-resistant strains of tuberculosis that are resistant to the drugs which we know can cure this disease. So if you're infected with drug-resistant tuberculosis anywhere outside of the developed world, you're in real trouble, and your chances of survival are actually quite small. Now, people who are in what we could call TB endemic countries, like Uganda, like South Africa, like West Africa, like South Asia, like Indonesia. These are big population centers. If you're a doctor and you're losing the battle against this disease, then frankly you're likely to take a lot more note of some guy who will be treated as slightly crazy in Western Europe. You're likely to say, well, tell me a little bit more about this. What is your evidence? So here's my evidence, this is my start of my evidence, but we've got other stuff as well. And so we managed to persuade, it's probably the best university in East Africa, Makerere University in Kampala in Uganda. And we did a presentation there to their pharmacology department. And at the end of it, we were very nervous because we didn't know how we were going to be received. We'd actually done some work in Uganda already, and we'd got some very positive response off the health workers we've been working with and from the patients. But this was all only anecdotal stuff, and we needed scientific data. So we did this presentation, and at the end of it, they said, right, well, we'll do a study ourselves. You can fund it. We're a very tiny charity, so that was a bit frightening, but we've funded it. And so we did this study with 180 patients, 90 patients on just standard TB drugs. This is for ethical reasons. We had to do it with TB drugs. 90 patients on TB drugs and 90 patients on TB drugs with the Moxa. These patients did better. The manuscripts for this study, that we're hoping there's going to be 3 papers published off the back of it, and we're hoping to see them published this year. They're in draft form in Uganda at the moment.
U Africi je također i problem AIDS-a vrlo raširen. Pretpostavljam da nije prošlo nezamijećeno onome tko bi možda Moksu koristio protiv tuberkuloze, da je probao upotrijebiti i za AIDS, za koje znamo da je zapravo problem imunološkog sustava. Ovdje se radi o jačanju imunološkog sustava. Kakva su tu? Imate li iskustva sa korištenjem Mokse na oboljelim od AIDS-a?
Well, to put it in perspective, these two diseases are deadly in combination. If you have the two diseases together and you don't have the HIV drugs, the likelihood you're going to die. And the amount of co-infection between these two diseases is why TB is so much out of control in Africa. Now the HIV drugs are coming in. They're coming in much bigger numbers. They've done a very good job in Africa with HIV drugs, but they still have not got TB under control. So when we started looking at this, we realized we had to look at the two diseases together. We were advised right at the start, don't look at them together, it's going to get too complicated. But if you're going to look at TB in Africa, you have to look at them together. And the reality is that HIV drugs tend to make TB drugs work less effectively, and vice versa. So they're very difficult to treat together. So we decided right from the start, we don't care if you have HIV, if you're HIV positive or not, we want to see how you respond to this treatment. So we included HIV co-infected patients within these two groups, these two cohorts of TB patients. And what we saw is the HIV patients responded slower, but the response was similar. The response was better in these Moxa patients who are HIV co-infected than they were with the just standard drugs and no Moxa patients who are HIV co-infected. The response was better. We call it the CD4 count. The CD4 cell is the marker for HIV. If it crashes down too low, you're in real trouble. And the CD4 improved more in our Moxa patients than it did in the no Moxa patients. The hemoglobin counts improved more in the Moxa patients than the no Moxa patients. So these big signs say that what we can say is both that Moxa seems to help recovery from TB and also strengthen the body in HIV cases to the extent that the patient should have more of their own host response to deal with both diseases.
Gospodine Jank, hvala vam na ovom iscrpnom predstavljanju te egzotične tehnike koja, eto, nije nepoznata na zapadu kod onih koji zanimaju inače istočne tehnike koje naravno su rasprostranjene po mnogim centrima i u Europi i u Hrvatskoj, no šire poznato, naravno to nije, a evo, treba nas li čuditi kad je i na samom izvoru to pomalo stavljeno u stranu pred akupunkturom još prije par tisuća godina. U svakom slučaju do neke sljedeće prilike, doviđenja i puno sreće sa svim pokušajima pomaganja, liječenja ljudima oboljelim od AIDS-a i tuberkuloze u Africi.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Eto, nekada davno ljudi nisu imali tehnologiju koja bi bila nalik nekim današnjim predodžbama, no to ne znači da nisu imali nikakvu tehnologiju. U slučaju Moksibucije radilo se ipak o poznavanju nekih životnih principa u našem tijelu, u kombinaciji sa poznavanjem ljekovitosti određenih biljaka i načina kako ih pripremiti i koristiti. Podrijetlo tih metoda danas je možda i zaboravljeno, ali one same ne. I pomalo opet nalaze svoje mjesto. A u međuvremenu želim vam laku noć.